This is episode 61 of the Women in Depth podcast. The information found in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Lourdes Fiato. Before we jump into today's amazing episode, I wanted to share with you something that I've been working on for some time that I am very excited about. And what it is an introductory exploratory course to shadow called Meeting Your Shadow. And I created this course because I truly believe that shadow work is the most important work we can do to be in better relationship with ourselves and with others. And from my personal experience, I know that when we can get into a better relationship with our shadow, we are better able to respond to others more authentically. We're better able to see and experience others more authentically. And it really expands our experience of ourselves. I feel that shadow work is the most important thing you can do. Shadow work is about connecting with the parts of yourself that you're not that familiar with or don't know about or have been buried for whatever reason. And when we reconnect with these parts of ourselves or even just become aware of them, we are able to live a more unabated, more fully engaged life. Now, it's really important to me that this course is the best course that it can be. So your feedback and insights regarding the course are extremely important to me. Because of this, I'm offering the first version of the course at a greatly reduced rate of $53 for everyone who signs up by October 22nd. My plan is to eventually offer the course at $147 or higher. And in addition to getting the course at the reduced fee, everyone who signs up will have access to all future revisions of the course. So if this is something that you're curious about and would like to learn more about, if you go to my website, www.lourdesfiato.com, on that homepage, there's a floating box and it says Meeting Your Shadow. And if you click on that box, there will be a video that tells you more about the course. And if you are ready to sign up, you can sign up in advance and you will receive the course on October 23rd. This course is for those of you who are interested in learning more about shadow, for those of you who would like to uncover your blind spots, who would like to get more familiar with how you get stuck and are not aware that you get stuck. One of the things that I really like about the course is there's a lesson on finding shadow where you least expect. And so again, this course is an introductory course to shadow. I believe that shadow work is something we're doing our entire lives, and you're never done with shadow. So if you're curious and would like to learn more, I invite you to go to my website, and on the homepage of my website, there is a floating box with the words Meeting Your Shadow. Just click on that and you'll find more information. And if you feel called, you can also sign up. Now to today's interview. I am so excited to share today's conversation with you. This was one of those conversations that for me, I know I'm doing the interview and I'm, keeping track of all this technology stuff, but this conversation was so profoundly moving and healing for me, and I know it will be for you as well. I had the great honor and privilege of speaking with Toko-pa Turner, and today Toko-pa will be our guide, inviting us to turn inward for answers. She will also deepen our understanding of a longing, a hunger that we all experience to some degree in different ways and in different times. And it's the longing for belonging. And Toko-pa will talk about why we often search for belonging in the external world. This can take shape as a search for family, community, relationship. It can mean a literal structure of creating a home. And she'll also talk about why, in order to truly belong, we must return home to ourselves. Toko-pa will also talk about the connection between the natural world, our dreams, metaphor, the feminine principle, and synchronicities in the journey of belonging. She will also differentiate between true belonging and false belonging. Toko-pa Turner is a writer, teacher, and dream worker. Blending the mystical tradition of Sufism in which she was raised with a Jungian approach to dream work, she founded the Dream School in 2001, from which hundreds of students have since graduated. Toko-pa has been interviewed by CNN News and BBC Radio and has a community of over 75,000 online readers. She is currently finishing a book on belonging, which explores the themes of exile, embodiment, and the search for belonging. Sometimes called a midwife of the psyche, Toko-pa's work focuses on restoring the feminine, reconciling paradox, and facilitating sacred grief and ritual practice. Hi, Toko-pa, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Lourdes. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for being here today. I wanted to start off by asking you to share, a little bit more about your very unique background. You were raised in the tradition of Sufism. Can you share a little bit about that and how that connects to, the work that you are doing now?
Certainly. So for those listeners who aren't aware of Sufism, it's actually a mystical branch of Islam, some people say. But then there are others who say that Sufism is even more ancient than that. And so the way that people mostly relate to Sufism is through the poetry of Rumi. And so Rumi was one of the, if not the original Sufi. And so a lot of the concepts that we observe in Sufism can be found in the poetry of Rumi. And like most mystical traditions, it's less about the worship of deities like we find in religious practices, but more about turning inward to hear the voice of God from within, and also turning outwards towards nature and the other than human life around us to receive similar transmissions. And so I was very blessed to be born into a family who is very involved with the international Sufi order. But Sufism is really, if you learn deeply about Sufism, it's really all about love. It's really all about grief and love and acceptance, a very deep acceptance of the whole spectrum of who we are as humans and as beings on earth, as sentient beings. And so this is the way that I was raised in this tradition. But then, like a lot of people, as I got into my teenage years, I went on a completely different path. And in fact, I left my family home when I was very young. I was only 14 years old, and I spent a number of years living in what we call the system. So I don't know if it's similar in the States, in the United States, but the system is, a system of homes and foster care facilities. So for people who are without a family, they go to live in these places, and it's not a terribly cheerful place to live. So there was a number of very dark years for me in those teen years. But at some point, I started to emerge from that darkness, probably I think I was 19 years old, and I discovered the book by Carl Jung, Dreams, Memories, and Reflections. And for like a lot of us, that was entry point into the Jungian writings, into Carl Jung's writings, and of course his community of peers. And discovering that book was the thread which connected me back to those early teachings of Sufism. There was something very similar in Jungian analytical psychology to the Sufi writings. Of course, there's a lot of differences too, but very similar in that mystical way, which says that we can turn inward for the answers. And
Mm.
and so this is what put me back onto the path of being interested in dreams, especially, and the inner life.
Wow, it's beautiful to see these threads because your book is about belonging, and it's very synchronistic to see how this connects to your own experiences, especially when you were in this system and then going back and almost like a full circle return to home.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for seeing that. It really, it really is because I had an experience a few years ago. I think it was about 2 or 3 years ago, where I was invited to speak at a conference, and I the conference was taking place in Montreal, and so I was flown out there, and I didn't pay much attention to the hotel where I was staying. And things have changed since I grew up, so I don't know much about the landscape of Montreal these days because I live on the west coast of Canada. But during this very dark period of my life, there was a time where I was living on the streets and getting involved with the wrong kinds of people and even panhandling for change. And when the taxi from the airport dropped me off at the hotel where I was going to speak on the topic of belonging and dream work, I realized that it was at the same corner where I used to panhandle for money. And I had this kind of
Oh,
crossing over of my worlds at that moment. And full circle is really the best language to describe that. So
wow.
I think my journey, the only thing that qualifies me to write on the topic of belonging is that it was something which was completely absent from my life. There was really
Mm.
an absence of it. And so it really characterized so much of what I was searching for my whole life. So that's the only thing that qualifies me to write on this subject.
Well, you were very kind to allow me to read some of the beautiful excerpts of this book, and it's really a deep, deep exploration into the themes of exile, embodiment, and the search for belonging. And I have to say that reading your writing, it's like poetry. It's like water for a parched throat. And with each drink, you become aware that you've been thirsting for this for a long time and how much this water, your writing, nourishes your soul and brings you back to life. And I made a note when I was preparing for our interview that reading the excerpts was like coming home to yourself. And so, it's just a beautiful lyrical writing. So thank you for creating this. I'm very excited to read the final product. Talk about what compelled you to write this book.
Mm. Well, thank you for those kind comments. I'm especially touched by your language around parchedness because it's a funny thing, but I would say that's one of the more common things that people say about my writing, that
Mm.
it has a moisture to it, and I really attribute that to the place where I live because I live in a rainforest. Here on Salt Spring Island, it's a
Ah,
rainforest, and it just rains all the time in the winter months, which are long. And so much of my writing on belonging has to do with coming back into relationship with the natural world. Because I think a huge part of what alienates us is our disconnection from the natural world. In fact, even calling it the natural world is a kind of alienating sort of language. It suggests that it is somehow not a part of us, that we're not a part of it. And so I frame belonging not as, most of us think of belonging as something that's outside of ourselves, that if we're clever enough and if we search hard enough, that maybe one day we'll find that place of belonging and we'll recognize it right away, and they'll recognize us and we'll feel at home. And I think that is true for some people some of the time, but for the most part, people can spend a whole lifetime searching for that place and never find it. And so I began to think of belonging more as an inside job, as a set of skills or competencies that we in modern times have lost or forgotten. And so one of those competencies, of which there are many, and I try to investigate as many as I've been privileged enough to be introduced to in my book, but one of those skills is about learning how to come back into conversation with the natural world around us, with nature, but also with the wilderness within, which for me, that central practice is around dream work. It's around listening to our dreams, because for me, the simplest way that I understand dreams is that nature is naturing through us in the form of dreams. So in the same way that a tree produces fruit or a plant produces flowers, dreams are produced through us. Dreams are the fruit. And that there's something nutritious in those fruits, both for us, but also for others, when we put those fruits in the form of offerings to our communities. So just to kind of circle back to your original question, which is what prompted me to write this book, it was, I was really possessed by the question of belonging when something happened to me a number of years ago. It was about 5 years ago now, where I fell into a sudden and inexplicable illness, which was characterized by extreme pain. And I became disabled. I was unable to leave the house for the better part of a year and a half, and it was an incredibly isolating and lonely time. And during this time, I had to confront the question, which had been living in me unconsciously my whole life. But now with this illness came right to the surface. And the question was, if I am unable to do anything for anyone else, am I still worthy of belonging? Am I still worthy of love? And I really doubted that I was. And so this illness was what I call an initiation by exile. So sometimes we are exiled by life. Sometimes we might have a place of belonging and we're actually, we have to break from a group or a relationship or an organization. And that's a different kind of, say, self-chosen exile or a forced exile. But then there's this more intimate form of exile, which I was experiencing, which can happen to people when they have a sudden loss or heartbreak or an illness, anything that puts us into a place of isolation where we're suddenly cut off from an old way of living. The door slams shut, and even though we want to go back to how things are, we can't. There is no going back. And instead, we're in this wholly disoriented place where we have to find a new way to be in the world. And so as I found myself in this groundless place, this question of belonging really rose up to the surface from my unconscious, and I began to just explore it, journaling at first, but then these dreams started to come through. And as I paid attention to these dreams, they presented me with new ways of looking at my own relationship to belonging. And so I just kept writing and writing and writing, and I was really kind of possessed by this question. And before you knew it, I realized I was writing a book, and that was it. I was done for it. It took me 5 years. So it's been a profound initiation, and I'm really looking forward to, getting this baby out of me.
Yes, initiations. I love your phrasing of initiation by exile, and how you in your description you included loss, heartbreak, illness, and these are all experiences that we all have in different shapes and forms at different times. And when you were speaking about that, it reminded me of one of your excerpts where you spoke about the ruins within us. And is it okay if I read one of the excerpts?
Of course.
Yeah. So this is what you wrote. There is a ruins in each of us, a place where what once was lives on like an echo, haunting the landscape of our lives with its weathered foundations. Abandoned, scavenged, and dismantled by time, the ruin is the holiest place in our heart. It is the ways in which we have been broken that have earned us a standpoint. It is in our life's absences that a wild longing is born. This place that has been ruined is a temple in which to worship, to throw down our grief and our forgetting, and praise what remains. After all, these remains are the evidence of how greatly we have loved, and should be venerated as the legacy of survival that they are. Oh my gosh, just reading that right now. Toko-pa, the hair on my arm is standing up. But that's what I thought of when you spoke about this initiation by exile, these transition points in our life where you step through a doorway and you leave something behind and you step into something and you don't know what that something is, but you do know that you can't go back.
Mm-hmm.
So can you speak a little bit more about, this metaphor of the ruins?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that happens for us in these times of initiation, in these times of exile, when we're forced out of what the poet John O'Donoghue calls false belonging. False belonging. So these are those places which appear to us at some point in our lives as if we are in belonging, but we may not be aware until we have been exiled or we've broken from that belonging how much we had to give up in order to remain in those places of false belonging. In other words, there is a silent contract in those places that require us to split ourselves off from the whole truth of who we are in order to fit in. And so belonging, in my view, is really a dynamic process. There are these times where we're inside and these times when we're outside. And when we're outside, we're given an opportunity. And I don't want to paint a pretty picture of it because, when we talk about a ruins, we are talking about a place of great grief, a place of great loss. And when we are exiled, when we're in a place of exile, we have to come to face that loss. We have to come to face the absences in our lives and in some way find a way to love them anyway. And love them in such a way that we don't wish that they were any different. Eventually, that's where you want to end up. So So, to give you an example of what I mean, I spoke a little bit about this dark time in my own life where I was living in the system, which was a very difficult and lonely place. You know, I didn't have a family who cared about me. I was very young, and so I was still forming. And it was a dangerous place. So there was a lot of lostness there. And lots of kids like myself, varying degrees of exile from their own families, who were just learning how to be people and not doing a great job at it for any of us, you know, because we weren't grown up yet. And lots of people had a real lack of privilege. And so this was a very, very hard time for me. Really years of difficulty of learning how to parent myself and making a lot of bad choices and mistakes. So, fast forwarding now 20 years, actually make that 30 or 25. Quick math there. So here I am. I fall into this terrible illness. I go into this place of exile in present time. And this is what happens for a lot of people. Suddenly you are transported back to those original traumas, those original places of loss. There's this kind of resonance between the past and the present that can be opened up by an event like this. And it's as if the original trauma is attempting to be integrated through this new iteration of fate. And so when I talk about the place of ruins and learning to venerate it, what I mean is learning how to re-story our lives in a way that we are no longer under the enchantment of other people's projections on our story as, for instance, a victim or an orphan or worthless or a failure or whatever you were taught about yourself, and learning how to reauthor the story in such a way that we don't wish for things to have been any different, because we know that having survived what we survived, we have been shaped into the person that we are today. And that there are certain gifts, there's a certain level of tenderness that comes from having lived with a wound that never would have been possible had we remained innocent of that experience.
That's really beautiful, Toko-pa, because I know that many of us struggle with making meaning, finding a way to integrate the ruins of our lives. And that's, so true. I know for me as well that the things that I've experienced, as painful as they were, have led me to where I am now. And I wouldn't be here, literally, doing the work that I do without those experiences or living the life that I'm living.
Exactly.
And there is a tenderness. There's a tenderness towards those experiences, which is quite a shift, because you go from anger, sadness, all of the different projections that you take on that work for a while, and then you do get to a place where you can look at that part of your life almost, not even with detachment, but like you said, with a tenderness, almost in a this is really pushing it. I know some people might not appreciate this as much yet, but almost a sense of gratitude in some ways,
Yes, certainly. Well, that is the enlightenment that is possible only to someone who has really grieved very thoroughly. Is to be grateful for. I think of it like carving out a bowl. that when we go into the depths of the grief and really naming and recognizing and living into relationship with the absences of our lives. And by absences, I mean those things that we never had, those things that we weren't given, those things that we always longed for. So learning to live with those absences through the grieving process, and also this restoring that comes from that, helping to recontextualize how the events, the discrepancies, the misfortunes of our past have shaped us into the people we are today. Only then can the bowl be deep enough to hold the capacity for joy and the creation of beauty and gratitude, like you said. We can become, I think, forgiveness really, in some ways, one form of forgiveness is thanking something that has hurt us so that it can release us.
One of the things that you write about in your book, which really resonated with me, and I know that this will resonate with many who are listening, has to do with the difficulty in receiving. And so I'm just going to read one of the excerpts here. For the person who survived on scraps of affection, there may be a lifelong habit of contraction that is only obvious when you are showered in appreciation. Here, the heart is challenged to receive at a greater capacity than it has ever known. And I found this beautiful and significant because there is a longing, a longing to be loved, a longing to receive, but then there's this contraction, there's this retreat when someone actually tries to give that to you, or there's a discomfort with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of a paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's the thing you want most in the world, and yet I think it really is like a muscle. I call it the receiving muscle because there's only so much havingness that we're able to have. We can only have so much havingness, which is the ability to have something. um, based on where our ceilings, based on the height of our ceilings, right? So if we were raised in some kind of scarcity of love, or a scarcity of acceptance, or a scarcity of even poverty, then our ceilings can be quite low on that havingness. And so in order to raise our ceilings, we have to stretch that receiving muscle. And this can be greatly helped by those who love us, who are willing to love us. But it's also something that we can practice at independently. And for me, receiving is not just a physical act, but it's a whole set of skills that maybe we could associate with the feminine. Or, I'll just say what the Jungians call the feminine, because not everybody knows that language. But the feminine refers not to gender, but it refers to a set of capacities that include anything receptive. So waiting, listening, receiving transmissions like dreams or ideas, the feeling life as it rises up from deep within, our subtlety of relationship with the world around us. So all of these things fall under the purview of what we would call the feminine. And so when we practice at these other skills of receiving our own feeling life, which is to say, not denigrating or devaluing or pushing it off, but living into a better relationship with it, a more receptive relationship with it, then our ability to receive from the world at large also grows. Those ceilings on our havingness can grow.
And would you say, Toko-pa, that one of the capacities that would fall under the feminine would be the ability to be in uncertainty and in ambiguity.
Absolutely. Mhm. Yeah, because I think, you know, our culture is a very yang-based culture. And so in the Chinese symbol of yin and yang, yin is what we would call the feminine. It's the receptive, fluid, feeling feminine part. And then the yang is action-oriented. It perceives a goal and moves in a linear fashion towards that goal. It wants to grow upwards and bigger and faster and better. And it has ambition and it is very independent as opposed to relational. And so there's nothing wrong with these qualities, but when they're not in balance with yin, then we have a dysfunctional system. And so because we've been raised in a yang biased culture here in the West, most of us are inclined along that bias. So what that means is the feminine or the yin based attributes are very much devalued internally. We've internalized that imbalance. And so a lot of us are really working to reclaim the feminine right now. And so to come back to your question around ambiguity, the masculine has no ambiguity. The yang is all about certainty and discernment, and it's about having a bottom line and having a map to get there. And the feminine or yin, on the other hand, it's about everything all as one. It's about the interconnectedness of things. And as such, there's not a necessarily clear path to get from here to wherever there is. It's much more about finding a sense of home in the present moment and coming to ground in our physical bodies.
So it's really as if these moments of, not moments, these periods of our life where we experience this emotional pain, this exile, the loss, the heartbreak, the illness, these are actually invitations from the feminine. And we really struggle with these invitations because things are not clear, things are uncertain, there is no ground. And so it's just an interesting paradox that part of embracing the natural world is actually stepping into these moments also, into that feminine energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, nobody goes willingly into initiation.
Right? Absolutely.
And I think that's because we can't underplay what happens to us in initiation. When we look at the myth of Inanna, which is probably the oldest story of initiation and descent into the underworld, where Inanna makes a trip to the underworld to visit her estranged sister Ereshkigal. And the traditional way of entering into the underworld is that you have to pass through a series of gates. And each gate requires Inanna to relinquish a piece of her armor until she is stripped bare. And even when she does arrive finally in her nakedness and bows low in front of her sister, Ereshkigal kills her. and so, without going into too much depth about the story, the Inanna's consorts revive her. They bring her back to life in a new form afterwards. But this is really what happens to us. I can speak from very personal experience, and perhaps you can relate in your own way. But when we go through an initiation like the one that I describe of going into illness, it really takes everything from you. Everything you thought about yourself is stripped away, and it humbles you to this bare essence where you have to ask yourself, if I have none of these things, if I have no armor, if I have no beauty, if I have no status, if I have no energy, if I have no intelligence, if I have none of the things which normally I prop myself up with, then what of me is left? And in a way, it is a kind of death, a symbolic death. And then hopefully, if we can make it through the initiation, we can begin to come back to life in a new way. And that might look like bringing what you've learned back into the world in the form of, some kind of beauty or creativity, or really even just a depiction of your journey, so that others who are going through something similar will know that they're not alone. And so this is why people don't go into initiation willingly, because it's a terrible thing. And a lot of people will do whatever they can to stay away from that place. And that's why a lot of people have midlife crises, because they have pushed off the initiatory process as long as possible. But unfortunately, it will come and find you, and that's the way of nature. It has a destructive side to it. So it really will come for you at some point and strip you of anything that is outdated and meaningless, and bring you into conversation with this gritty part of being human. There is another side where after we have gone through initiation, we can begin to come into the true medicine of our calling here on planet Earth. And once we have found that, we have a sense of belonging to the parts of ourselves which have been for too long exiled. But then that also commutes to the relationships, the quality of relationships that we can now begin to foster in the outside world as well. And so true belonging really comes from our going through this descent.
Toko-pa, thank you so much for sharing your deep, deep wisdom with us today. I am so grateful for this opportunity and for your time. I would love if you can share with our listeners maybe an update on your book, and also about your dream school and any other resources or offerings that you'd like to share.
So yeah, the book is finished. It's available for pre-order on my website now, which is really wonderful. We will ship the first edition of signed or dedicated copies on November the 15th, 2017. And then probably in the new year, it will be available officially worldwide on Amazon and things like that, in digital format and all of that. And in the meantime, I have this wonderful series of podcasts that I created called Encounters on Belonging, where I am in intimate conversation with 7 amazing women from different disciplines, speaking about the many different faces and faculties of belonging, the many different forms of belonging. And it's been incredibly successful so far. Thousands of people have gone through this Encounters series, and I'm offering it for free so people can go through the Encounters on their own time if they want to. And then also, if you're interested in working more in depth with your dreams, I have an online course called Dream Walking, which takes us through what I call the cornerstones of dream work. So showing different ways that we can begin to understand the language of our dreams and begin to recover a relationship with that inner wild so that we can hear that nature prompting us in the direction of our vocation.
Oh my goodness, those all sound amazing. I'm so congratulations on your book release, Toko-pa. I am excited to get my hands on one of those books, and all of the resources you shared, we will include them in the links for the show notes.
Thank you so much, Lourdes. Thank you for the deep quality of your listening and your thoughtful questions. It's been a pleasure to connect with you today.
Okay, take gentle care. I am so grateful to have had the gift of this time with Toko-pa today. For those of you who listen regularly, you know how much I love metaphor as a tool for self-discovery, self-understanding, and healing. I feel like it's one of the best ways to really go deep, and to go deep in a way that we also feel it. It's embodied. It's not just in our intellectual explorations or in our thought. It's something we can tap into with our body and with our emotions. I found it incredibly powerful when Toko-pa shared the metaphor of the ruins within us, that they mark where an initiation occurred, that this marks where we have been broken, and what remains is sacred space in which to worship and grieve. And I loved how she stated that these remains are the evidence of how greatly we have loved and should be venerated as the legacy of survival that they are. For show notes to today's episode and links to the resources that Toko-pa shared, this would include the link to pre-order her book, Belonging, Remembering Ourselves Home, which is going to be released in November, or to sign up for her free 6-week series on belonging, or to sign up for her online dream school. Please visit www.lourdesfiato.com/women-in-depth. And if you are interested in learning more about the Meeting Your Shadow course that I am offering at the end of the month, please go to my website, and on that first page, there's a floating box with an image of the moon and the words Meeting Your Shadow. And if you click there, you'll get more information about the course. And if you feel called to sign up, you can do that as well. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe on iTunes or share with a friend. And again, thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.